You're listening to the Bad Jews podcast. We're coming to you with episode 3, and we're your co-hosts. I'm Anthony Fish-Hodgson, data analyst and law school dropout.
I'm Caitlin Leroy, a lawyer, law lecturer, and I finished law school.
Congratulations on that.
Thanks.
And you know, today we're starting something special, which is that we've invited a guest to join us. Just in case you're wondering that there are only 2 bad Jews. We have here Mitchel Joffe Hunter, who is a good friend of the podcast, who's going to hopefully help us talk through the question around the Jewish obligation to protest. Welcome, Mitchel.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Unfortunately, in Cape Town, we don't have something like an anti-Zionist Jewish rabbi. And so as a result, we've had to find ways from our community to find community leaders to lead these services. And Mitch is essentially the person who's more often than not been involved in or literally leading these kinds of services. One such service recently, or actually I shouldn't say service,
yes, shiur.
A shiur. We did a shiur, which is sort of a learning space of Jewish scriptural wisdom, or he'll tell us, not necessarily scriptural. Mitch did a shiur that we both attended recently around the topic of something he called the rabbi's cow, which was essentially supposed to explain to us what is the Jewish obligation to protest. And that's what we've invited Mitch to talk about here today. So Mitch, if you want to up to you if you want to introduce yourself, if you want to jump straight into the topic, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was funny when you said a great friend of the podcast. I've listened to your one episode. If that makes me a friend, I'm a good friend. So Mitchel Joffe Hunter. I'm originally from Joburg, now living in Cape Town. I work as a public librarian. I'm very passionate about that. But in the Jewish community for over a decade, I've done pro-Palestinian activism, and that's often put me a bit on the edge with kind of mainstream Jewish community. So it's a lot of fight for kind of access and not. And what's particularly become important to me is making Jewish community spaces that we can really live our traditions and bring it to life. And so the shiur was one example of me wanting to learn Talmud, wanting to kind of engage with the wisdom, but not having a space. And so okay, might as well do it myself. And the community we did it in is a great space to kind of do that practice.
And can you just say very quickly what does Talmud mean? Just because we're engaging an audience of all kinds of different people. We spoke in our previous episodes about the Torah, but the Jewish Bible, but where does the Talmud fit into that?
So the Talmud's the next kind of layer. So the Torah, the Old Testament, Jewish Bible is, the original 5 books. And then the first generations of rabbis made commentary. How do we use that Torah in our day-to-day life? So they're trying to create rules for running a society, especially once in exile. And they had these debates, and all those debates were recorded. And then the next generation of rabbis commented on those debates. How do we encourage that? So it's basically a record of generations of rabbis debating the rules of how to live in a society. So there's some very legalistic stuff, which I'll leave to Caitlin. But there's also a lot of some esoteric wisdom, moral teachings. But yeah, it's debates of the rabbis over generations.
All right. And so then I suppose jumping straight into it, one of these debates is about the rabbi's cow.
Yeah, it's about a cow. So this is from a tractate, a section of the Talmud called Shabbat. And it's called that because it's about all the rules of the Sabbath. What are you allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. And one of the rules that they're discussing is about the rule of carrying things outside your home. So traditionally on Shabbat, you're not allowed to carry things outside of your home, but you are allowed to wear them. So, for example, you might see Orthodox Jews walking to shul on a Shabbat morning, not carrying a tallis bag, but wearing their tallis already. Because you can't carry a tallis bag, that's an act of work, but you can wear it. Just as Jews aren't allowed to carry things, also our animals aren't. So the principle of rest applies not just to Jews, but to everyone. And so cows are one animal that's also not allowed to carry things. And that's similar, there's examples of goats that can't wear certain things. Roosters can't wear a strap around their feet because that counts as work for the rooster, and the rooster must rest. So the one thing is the cow can't wear a strap between its horns. And the rabbis are having this debate about why can't it wear a strap? And what comes from out of that debate is an example of a cow that was found walking outside its yard with a strap between its head. And Rabbi Elazar was critiqued for this. So that's Rabbi Elazar's cow. And he was critiqued. And why, Rabbi Elazar, did you allow your cow to work on Shabbos? You're a mensch. You're a great person. Rabbi Elazar's got lots of his good deeds to his name, but he allows his cow to work on Shabbos, breaks one of the fundamental rules. And it goes from there, where one rabbi actually points out, so this is that's like the first rabbi generation critiqued him, the next generation saying, but actually, didn't Rabbi Elazar have 12,000 cows? How could he speak about Rabbi Elazar's one cow? It doesn't make sense. And it comes out that it wasn't Rabbi Elazar's cow. It was his neighbor's cow. So his neighbor actually let the cow walk out the yard, and Rabbi Elazar didn't critique him, didn't protest his neighbor's breaking of the rule. And so he was held responsible by calling it Rabbi Elazar's cow. So even though it wasn't his cow, he's just as responsible for his neighbor's actions as if it was him who broke the Shabbos rules. And that's where the story begins.
So that's the rabbi's cow.
That's the rabbi's
Or not
cow.
the rabbi's cow.
Not the rabbi's cow.
Not the rabbi's cow. Okay, that's interesting. So what do the texts say about this responsibility to protest? I mean, is it just that if any neighbor or anyone is letting their cow roam free with a strap, then does everyone have to stop that cow from roaming? Or how does it play out in a kind of rule or custom or norm?
The rabbis, it's in the tractate on Shabbat, it's 54b, by the way. After speaking about this cow, they then veer, and they're not talking about Shabbat anymore, and they're now speaking about exactly that question, speaking about protest. And they say anyone who is able to protest the actions of a member of their family and does not do so is responsible for the transgression of the members of their family. Sorry, not action, transgression. And then they broaden it one step further. Anyone who is able to protest against the transgressions of the members of their city and does not do so is responsible for the transgressions of the members of their city. And similarly, anyone who is able to protest the transgressions of members of the entire world, of the world entire, and does not do so is responsible for those transgressions. So they're really making it, are you able to protest this? Is it related to you in some way, either family, city, or world? And if you don't, you're held responsible as if you are the one who did the deed.
So maybe it would be helpful to kind of break down the different components of this prescription or whatever, this rule, that if you are able to protest the transgressions of someone either in your family or broader community or the world, you don't, then you hold responsible almost as if you had committed the transgression yourself.
Yeah.
So maybe starting from the beginning, it will be helpful to just look at this idea of what is protest. And then after, I think we should also look at the linked idea of ability, because it's what you're able to protest. So what level of ability is required for someone to actually have this obligation, and what is required of them to do. So maybe we can start there on what is protest. Must I go and shout, no, that cow has a strap, or must I actually try and stop the cow and rip the strap off, or must I just go inform my neighbor, like, your cow's wandering around strapped and it needs to be strapless, unstrapped, what is...
Awkward how much we're saying strap.
I know.
That's a great question. They don't actually get into, there's two words in that big rule that they don't get into. One is transgression. They don't clarify what type of transgression they're talking about. They take that as a given.
Okay.
And the other one is protest. They also don't really talk about what protest entails, what's actually required. And they just leave that. In later examples, which we can come to, they speak about kind of rebuke and responsibility. But there's another set of discussions in another chapter or section of Talmud, Bava Batra, where they do get into protest, and this isn't something I brought up in the shiur we had. It's Bava Batra 33a, and it's a section on property law. There's way too much law going on. Section on property law.
Just the right amount of law.
And the context is A person who owns a piece of land leaves for whatever reason, they're traveling, someone else occupies that property. At what point does the property become the person who's now occupying it, right?
So it mirrors actually contemporary debates in property law.
And there they get quite specific of basically edge cases of what the owner of that piece of land has to do in order to claim it. And one, they have to protest it. And what does protest mean? It means they have to, within a period of 3 years, they have to approach an authority who's got jurisdiction over that piece of property and make a specific claim that that person is occupying my land and I intend to bring a case against them. So it's like protest then is like an appeal to an authority that happens timeously, that's proactive, that's specific, and that can be kind of almost adjudicated on. But that's kind of one other context which maybe applies, and they use the same Hebrew word for protest. But there's other stories. So there's one I want to find here, my little source sheet. It's a conversation about the elders of the city and the princes of the city. So it's the city, and the princes are robbing, or they're exploiting the farmers, the people who live there, taking too much for themselves, and the elders are rebuked. And the elders are rebuked, and the rabbis say, but why are the elders rebuked? They aren't the ones who kind of taxing too high or exploiting too much. It's the princes. And says, no, but the elders did not protest. So the elders had a relationship with the princes. They are kind of the two kind of heads of the community in some way. And they didn't call out or try to change the way that the princes were behaving. So what is protest in that case? It's actually just having that conversation or lodging a complaint, not necessarily to a high authority, but to someone who's doing wrong and saying, listen, you're doing wrong. You should change your behavior. And that, it seems to be in this context, even with Rabbi Elazar, should have just gone to his neighbor and said, you're doing wrong. So it's a protest is actually the rabbis starting very small.
Yeah, like low standard, low expectation of people. It's really just pointing out that there is a transgression and calling out the person who's committing the transgression.
Yeah. And I suppose taking from the other thing, it should happen immediately and directly.
So would it be correct to say, I mean, obviously in the Talmud, these rabbis debated it a lot. They didn't always agree on everything. Would it be correct to say that they broadly agreed on the fact that what's unacceptable is to do nothing when there's something wrong happening around you?
Yeah, definitely you have to do something. And I think that's the whole point of the sugya is that this portion is that you have to do something, but it's only because they have that word, you don't have to solve the issue. The pressure isn't put on that you have to actually make the situation perfect. It's just anyone who has the possibility or the capability or the ability to protest it should do so. So there is that word of capable or possible. There's a few translations you can use for it. Yeah, so it's efshar, which means to be possible. So they didn't say anyone who can, or just everyone should protest. They didn't say everyone should protest the transgressions of the members of the family. They said anyone who has the capability to do so. So there's some recognition there that we are not always in the right position, whether socially, whether with regards to health, whether we're in the actual context. But if there is a context where your voice can have an effect, then they say you should do something.
Right, and I think this sort of hints at, and we should really come back to this question of capacity in trying to change the world around us. Before we go there, I want to ask this question around, okay, so it's not okay to do nothing when there's something wrong happening around you. You need to do something within what's possible for you, within what's you're capable of. We still then have to ask the question, there's a range of things that any person could do. Which should they do? And I don't know if the Talmud has consensus on that or if you have your own view on that. But, if we bring to the modern context, there's a big difference between a protest that perhaps risks your own livelihood to help someone else, or complaining to the manager in a restaurant, or, like there's lots of different ways you can imagine trying to correct some wrong. And I'm trying to sort of locate almost the scale of within those real alternatives, how much are you supposed to do? Do you have any sense of either the Talmud or your view on that?
I don't know the answer from the Talmud. I think they my sense from the discussions is they're saying you should do something, and they're not saying it has to, as I said, have to solve it or necessarily be effective. The point is to do the act itself. So it's almost an end in itself, is to do the act. From my sense, yeah, it depends. It depends so much on the context. What's going wrong? What's the scale of it? Is it a one-on-one thing, something with your family? Is it a big worldwide issue? They have very different options of.
So the
Of what you're
scale
gonna
of
do.
the transgression might or should inform the scale of their response or the level of protest.
And the urgency. This is it's just protest. Sometimes protests can take too long. Like if you have the ability to actually directly intervene and stop a harm from happening, it's obviously better to stop a harm from happening than protest someone doing that.
And there might be other aspects of kind of Jewish text that, to save a life, there's obligations like that kind of complement this. But the way I'm interpreting it, how you've explained, is that it is it's almost like a baseline, and it's really just a principle of you shouldn't do nothing. So if we bring it into a local, more concrete context, it might look like, putting your name to an open letter, or kind of say your synagogue is doing something that you're not happy with in relation to celebrating the conduct of the IDF. It might involve just going to your rabbi and saying, I'm not comfortable with this kind of messaging in my community, or depending on what your local context is. If we're looking at the kind of current one of the major political issues facing our communities, it might look like something just like that.
The synagogue is an interesting example. One of my favorite portions from the prophets, it's from Isaiah, and this section is used on the Yom Kippur morning. It's the Haftorah, which is the reading from the prophets that you do after the Torah reading on a Saturday morning, and it's on the Yom Kippur morning service. And Isaiah comes. It's a reading from Isaiah which says, "Is this the fast I demanded, that you wear sackcloth and kind of demean yourselves?" He's like, "No, absolutely not. The fast I wanted is to feed the hungry, free the captive, break the chains of oppression." And the story behind that is he actually stormed into a synagogue, and he opened the doors and stepped into the synagogue, and everyone was busy doing their Yom Kippur davening. Yom Kippur is Day of Atonement and kind of reflection on our transgressions of the past year. And Isaiah storms in and he says, "What are you doing, everyone? Is this the fast God wants? God doesn't want a fast like this. God wants, a much more moral and socially active fast." So you could go speak to the rabbi. It's probably maybe a good step. But you could also burst open the doors and follow Isaiah and step in and say, "What are you doing? Why is the IDF on your wall? Like, what's going on?" So we've got good precedent
for other forms of protest. No, but I think that is useful, and maybe also to think of this as just being one component of a broader set of laws, principles, moral kind of statements, ethical positions, that when we take them together can give us quite a rich basis upon which to feel moved to act and to think about how we can be more ethical in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, I think it's fair to say, the way that the three of us know each other is through our shared Jewish and anti-Zionist identities. And so I want to sort of bring the conversation there quickly just to say, I think we'd probably all agree, and tell me if you don't, that it's fair to say that on the topic of Israel's wrongdoings, many Jewish people aren't doing enough, or perhaps aren't even doing anything, or even are complicit, participating in supporting Israel's wrongdoings. And so I suppose I wanted to go to a question of, if we look at the contemporary mainstream Jewish community around the world, I would say failing in this obligation to protest wrongdoings. I wondered if you had examples to share with us about moments in history where Jewish individuals, communities, groupings were upholding this obligation, what that looks like.
Yeah, I suppose there's options, both religious and secular. I think Isaiah is a great one. because he frames it in the context of the community that he's working within, right? Because obviously there's a shared belief there. But going through the years, I mean, if we go quite close to the present, the Bund was incredible. So that's the Jewish Bund, which is a new book out, by the way. So maybe you can come up in a future episode of the podcast.
By Molly Crabapple.
By Molly Crabapple. So they socialist Eastern European group, particularly formed in opposition to Zionism, to say rather than Jews having to flee from anti-Semitism, to fight anti-Semitism where it is, but they're also socialist labor organizers. So a lot of them were involved in trade unions, and they did, a variety of forms of protest that is similar to trade union, strikes, pickets, things we know. It's a great example from the building of the Garden Shul, actually. So when the original Garden Shul was too small, so they built the big one. So the small one is now the Jewish Museum, and the current one is the one that's being spoken about, and was mostly English Jews, so Jews from England, who were praying there, and they wanted a bigger shul, and they hired British workers, non-Jewish British workers, to build it. And all the Eastern European Jews were like, come on, have some Jewish solidarity, we're struggling here, we all builders from the homelands. And anyway, that's a whole nother story. But they had a protest outside the Garden Shul calling on communal solidarity across class and language and
what years was this?
Early
because the Garden
1800s.
Shul is one of the oldest, it is the oldest synagogue in Cape Town.
One of there are communities which are a bit older, but as a building.
Oh, as a building. So you would say 1800s.
Late 18, early 19. Yeah, maybe just after the Anglo-Boer War, that kind of space. But that was also kind of an internal Jewish politics being enacted, and it's these Yiddish-speaking workers protesting there. So that. And then you've got, from the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, you've got some of those members are very Zionist and kind of joined the IDF and moved there, and others stuck to a more international politics. So Marek Edelman is a great example. He lived in Poland his whole life until he passed in the mid-2000s. And he maintained, it's ghetto uprising. So that's one example of protest, right?
He was actively involved
that's an active
quite
resistance.
Substantial protest. And he was one of the leaders of the resistance.
One of the leaders of the resistance, and it's more than protest, right? That's getting into direct action, that's rebellion and uprising.
It's sacrificing your life.
Yeah, putting your life on the line to save the lives of yourself and your community. But after that, he continued to maintain a life of protest, lots of communist, labor-orientated stuff, but also pro-Palestinian activism. So he refused all overtures by Israel to kind of honor him or welcome him into Israel. He lived in Poland his whole life. He fought with the Polish government, which turned right-wing at various points as well, and sent messages of solidarity to Palestinian leadership. And you had this famous quote, which I'm totally going to butcher. I don't know if either of you know it.
That Jews should always be in solidarity with the oppressed.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the spirit of it. Jews should always be in solidarity with the oppressed. So,
well, it's actually even stronger than that. It's to be a Jew is to be in solidarity with the oppressed and not the oppressor. I paraphrase it, but I think it's quite beautiful the way that he links it to actually Jewish identity. It's that is how you can fulfill that kind of your identity as a Jewish person, is to have that solidarity. So Marek Edelman embodies this. The multiple levels, from the family to the community, as in his role in the uprising, but then broader society. It doesn't end at the boundaries of his community, but it goes across to other communities and the world at large, which I think is links to the obligation.
So we had this conversation previously, Caitlin and I, and in fact, I would say have had it many times, around how disappointed we are to look back at our Herzliya education and notice that while there were many Jewish anti-apartheid activists. We learned about them in the subject called history, but not in the subject called Jewish history, which is and again, we acknowledge that the vast majority of the Jews in South Africa were not anti-apartheid activists, but they were very prominent ones, and how wonderful it would be to include that in the education about what it is to be Jewish, Jewish values, obligation to protest, etc. And I wondered, because I know that you've also done some of your own research about the history of Jews in South Africa and their racialization. Is there any aspect of that? I mean, we often encounter that Jews who've been in solidarity against apartheid and colonialism in South Africa are sort of internationalists. Is there an aspect of it? Are you aware of an aspect of it where such people understood themselves to be embodying some kind of Jewish ethos, or?
Yeah, it comes up in multiple ways. A lot of them express, I mean, each of the individuals, their life histories are so different. A lot of them express Jewish values from history, from like social values, but it's spiritual values, but they're not spiritual people often, and cultural values. Others distance themselves, and that's partially a reaction to being cut out, right? So like...
Well, maybe you can just describe briefly how that happened, that being cut out.
Right. So there's a long history of the South African Jewish community cutting out people who expose values that the mainstream community is not aligned with. So one example, which is a quote. I didn't come prepared to discuss. A quote in the South African Jewish Chronicle, which was published in Johannesburg. So this is from 1905, plus minus. And the editor says, Jews can have any politics, but one thing that kind of is that their Jewish identity must commit them to is to the supremacy of the white man. And any Jew who goes against the supremacy of the white man and kind of deigns to associate themselves with black people writ large should be cut out from the community. I have another word, but basically should be cut out from the community and boycotted. But this comes through later and later. So you've got all sorts of Jewish figures in the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, most especially from 50s, 60s, who, as they get involved in anti-apartheid activity, their synagogues exclude them, their families cut them off, they can't get employment in Jewish kind of space, and so then they're totally out of the Jewish community. And this continues up until the present. I was disinvited from Limud because I'd been speaking on platforms about Palestine. And, not to try and put myself on the level of some of those people, but just to show that this is a trend of over 120 years where whenever the Jewish community is faced with someone who they feel threatened by because the political values expressed are contrary, the response, rather than what the Talmud does, which is always to keep minority opinion in, is to rather exclude and cut out.
Yeah, it's a few interesting things. The one is, I guess it's from the perspective of the kind of mainstream or establishment Jewish community, there was a wanting to have a positive or amicable relationship with the apartheid government would lead them to, push out or kind of excommunicate anti-apartheid activists. And now what we see is, and we saw it then too, but it's playing out now in wanting to have this positive relationship with, it seems like, the Likud government, and then pushing out not only anti-Zionists, but really anyone who expresses a kind of different position is faced with a lot of backlash today, in varying forms. So that's a kind of, I think, an interesting pattern that's continued.
Yeah, I mean, it's been personally disappointing to me. I mean, I must say, my own experience in the mainstream Jewish community was quite similar, in the sense that I had noticed more and more that the values that matter to me are not the ones that are the ones being pushed in those spaces. And it pushed me away from my own Jewish identity. And then later on, I sort of learned more and more about many examples historically, including locally, of Jewish people embodying exactly the kind of values that I do connect with. And there's this question of, well, why didn't they get transmitted to me? Well, precisely because the people in the previous generations were pushed out. And so those values didn't filter down. So yeah, I mean, it's really quite an upsetting thing to confront, I think, for me, and I think for us in general. I did want to bring it back to, I mean, we've talked about, okay, so there's clear Talmudic guidance on a Jewish obligation to protest. We shouldn't be doing nothing, we must be doing something. We briefly touched on earlier the question about capability and capacity. And I think, what brings us together in this podcast is a moment in time where being a Jewish person in the world where Israel is what it is and does what it does is very challenging. No, sorry, I don't mean challenging for us. I mean like challenging in the context of this conversation. What are we supposed to be doing? But part of that question is, it's one thing to say your neighbor's doing something wrong, you need to stop it. It's another thing to say there's something happening on the other side of the world. There's lots of awful things happening in the world all the time. Does anyone have the capacity to interact with all those things? And I suppose I'm going to ask you something that is actually a question, which is sort of how do we reach that balance between recognizing that people have limited capacity versus when terrible things happening elsewhere in the world, it seems like there's some obligation to do something.
Yeah, that tractate I quoted from earlier, the Shabbat 54b, that's verse where it says, if you have the obligation to protest the transgressions of a member of a family, of a member of the city, and a member of the world. So family, and obviously that can be family and friends, chosen family, that's your immediate. City, at that time, was a lot smaller. Cities today are massive. And then world. So world's obviously supposed to be bigger than the city. And yeah, the world is huge. And we're so connected now in a way that the rabbis at that stage couldn't conceive of. That how are you supposed to protest any transgression by a member of the world? There's a commentary on that by Rashi, where Rashi specifies that for him, so Rashi is a later rabbi, a medieval rabbi, so he's a few hundred years after rabbis who wrote that portion. And his comment, and he comments on basically everything. Rashi is the guy who
We've all heard of him.
on the entire Talmud.
Rashi and Rambam.
Yeah, exactly. The two of them.
Those are the two main guys.
And Rashi says, when you read the world entire, the whole world, understand it as your community. So he uses a Bechol Yisrael, so the community of Jews, as that community. And what I suppose he's saying is that the world entire is your world entire, is the space where you have a relation. So if something's happening in Colombia, I've got no relation to anything happening in Colombia that I can use. So I've got no capability of protesting that.
On Rashi's interpretation.
On Rashi's interpretation. Or even on the capability interpretation. Like, Colombia is just not part of my world. Now, obviously it's horrible what any transgression happening to anyone in Colombia, but I don't know what I could do in that context. Now, if there was a big South African-Colombian relationship, like at the national level, then suddenly that is part of my world, right? Because now the government that I live under has a relationship. So now I can protest because it becomes part of the world. But it currently isn't, as far as I'm aware. I could be corrected. So Palestine is very connected. It's both part of the Jewish world because it's local Jews are supporting, and it's a Jewish state speaking in our name. Our government also has trade relations. We've got a linked history of resistance. So Palestine's very clearly within our world, but other places aren't. And I suppose it's up to each person to then figure out. And that's what I kind of like about this portion, that it puts obligation on us. We should be doing active in the world. But two, it kind of forces us to ask questions. What am I capable of doing? What transgressions do I see? What do I see in my immediate surrounding, my bigger surrounding, and in the world? And then who is that world? And I don't know if that kind of answers or maybe circumscribes the capacity question. One is that the world isn't everything. it's what you have relation to, where your voice could actually matter. And two, it's then also what are you capable of doing.
But on my phone, the world is everything.
Well, I think that's an important point, and it links to what you were saying. Like, our world is very different from Rashi's world, and what becomes a part of your world is a different process to how something would become a part of your world at that time. Given, I mean, for a lot of people who had no connection to Palestine or Israel, just looking at the footage of what's been happening in Gaza has created a kind of sense of solidarity and connection across the world. So I think having the world's issues in your phone, in your hand, creates a kind of interrelationship or relations that otherwise we wouldn't have had it not come into that intimate space of like our phone and our lives and you wake up in the morning and you read the news and see all of the horrible things that are happening. It becomes a part of your world.
It becomes a part of your world, but it doesn't mean that you have a relational connection to that place. So you might know what's happening, and so it feels it's affecting your psyche. It's in here. It doesn't mean you necessarily have a relationship that you can use to protest.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So the phone brings the world to us, but it doesn't necessarily bring us to the world in any
but it can cause
relational way.
It can cause us to look at each of the different kind of issues and think, well, which of these issues can I make a difference in, and how can I make a difference, or what can I do to protest, whatever thing we see. But I wonder what Rashi would say today, with TikTok and X.
So this question of relationality, it seems to impact how the obligation looks in terms of what a person should do, how closely related you are to some wrongdoing. But I would say that it's also the case that how closely related you are to some wrongdoing impacts how effectively you're able to do something about it. It's much easier for me to stop you from harming Caitlin right here than for me to stop something happening around the corner that I'm not there for. And so I suppose what I wanted to ask is then that effectiveness question. And I know we've sort of touched on it, but is the Talmudic obligation, you've said it's an end in itself, right? But does that mean we're just totally indifferent to effectiveness, or are we trying to be as effective as we can? Is there a stronger obligation to try and find an effective path to protest an injustice?
I think in this section, the rabbis aren't interested in effectiveness. There are some translations of it that you'll see floating around where it says anyone who's able to effectively protest action should do so, but that effective is completely an insertion. It's not in the Hebrew or in an easy interpretation from the Hebrew. And the rabbis go quite at pains to specify that a protest should be lodged regardless of whether it's going to do something or not. I don't necessarily think that's the end of the story, but I want to give an example of that. How keen are you to do some drama?
I didn't do drama for matric.
I'll try anything once.
Okay. So it's from the same tractate. We've just moved down a few verses. And the rabbis, they're having this exact discussion. So that first, there's a discussion about the Reish Galuta, who's the exarch, the head of the Jewish community in Babylon, and he's being held accountable for the transgressions
of his cow.
Not of his cow. Not of his cow in this case. Yeah, because his house, they didn't protest what was happening in the community, and the rabbis discussed that, and then they move on to something bigger. So they've done an example of the rabbi and his cow. They've done an example of the elders and the princes. Remember, they're in a city. The Reish Galuta, which is the Jewish community in Babylon, or the head of the Jewish community in Babylon. So they've moved from family or immediate surroundings to city, and now they're moving to the whole world. And this is a conversation between the angel Gabriel and God. So this is going out of the world. And who wants to be God?
I feel accused.
Okay, so Anthony, you're going to be the Holy One. Caitlin, you're going to be Gabriel. So I'll just introduce.
Are you the narrator?
I'm the narrator, so I've got the first and the last lines. That's the best line.
Last word.
So Shabbat 55a, verses 6 to 8, that's what we're reading from. So as Rabbi Acha, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said, never did a promise manifesting a good attribute emerge from the mouth of the Holy One, blessed be they, and they later retracted it. So that's God. So never did God say something and later retract it and rendered it evil, except with regards to this matter. So this is the only time God made a statement and then pulled it back. Go for it.
Go and inscribe a tav of ink on the foreheads of the righteous as a sign, so that the angels of destruction will not have dominion over them. And inscribe a tav of blood on the foreheads of the wicked as a sign, so that the angels of destruction will have dominion over them.
Master of the universe, how are these different from those?
These are full-fledged righteous people, and those are full-fledged wicked people.
Master of the universe, it was in the hands of the righteous to protest the conduct of the wicked, and they did not protest.
It is revealed and known before me that even had they protested the conduct of the wicked, they would not have accepted the reprimand from them. They would have continued in their wicked ways.
Master of the universe, if it is revealed before you that their reprimand would have been ineffective, is it revealed to them?
So the Holy One, blessed be they, retracted their promise to protect the righteous and decided that those who failed to protest would also be punished. So what have we just heard? So there's a town of wicked people with a few righteous people. God wants to punish the wicked and tells the angel to put a mark on their head, so that the angel of death goes and punishes all the wicked ones. And Gabriel says, but what about the righteous? They should also be punished. And God, because they didn't protest the actions of the wicked, God says, but I know that their protest would have been ineffective. It wouldn't have landed. It would have landed on deaf ears. Nothing would have changed. So I'm not going to protest, not going to hold them accountable, because nothing would have come. And Gabriel says, you know that, but did they know that? They didn't know that their protest would be ineffective. They should have tried. If they had tried and it turned out to be ineffective, they've at least tried. And then God changes his mind. So the rabbis, in relating that story, one, we can protest God. Gabriel protests God directly, so really the world is our oyster. But two, they're making the point that what we think, if we hold back from protesting because we think our protest is ineffective, that's not a good reason not to protest. They're saying the protest, it's almost to have this belief that the world can change, that something we do might have an impact, because it might not have changed the wicked people's views, but it might have given them a sense, an experience of protest that they could have used later. It might have inspired some youth later that protested. It could have effects beyond the direct target. It could have positive effects branching down.
And we can never really know what the full effect of our actions are.
Yeah, we never know who we're going to inspire, what's going to change. Now, they haven't got into a discussion about when our actions might cause harm, but we don't know that either. I mean, we can think about it, obviously. We should, but from the rabbi's point of view, it's better to at least try.
So it's one of actually in a different life, I used to tutor ethics students at UCT, and one of the most popular theories you talk about is called utilitarianism, which says basically what's the right thing to do is to try and maximize good consequences in the world. And one of the biggest objections to that theory is the consequences are unknowable. You can't. Of course, then we do tend to say it's not like we can't make educated guesses or estimates about what might cause what, and we should try our best to produce good consequences rather than bad ones. We should try to do effective protest. But it sounds like what you're saying is it's almost parts of why the obligation is that you, in the first place, don't do nothing. Because you can't know that there's not something that would help, and so you should be thinking about what that something is.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a way that protest invigorates the soul. It can bring us the energy to imagine that there is a better world. You meet people in protest as well and form strong bonds. We all met at a Shabbat against genocide. And a lot of many of our best friends or comrades come from meeting in protest, even in ineffective protests, but which formed communities that could then get together and then do effective protests. So it's an invigoration of the soul that allows you to make the world a better place, or imagine at least that it's possible to change, rather than getting despondent.
Yeah, and thinking, oh well, it's not going to make a difference, so I'm going to do nothing. And I think that seems to be the kind of theme that comes out of this: is it's not good enough to just say, well, I think it's not going to do anything, so I'm not going to do anything. We have an obligation at least to try.
Yeah, and I'm a big fan of trying. I think that it'll be quite difficult for anyone we're talking to, whether through this podcast or in general, to listen to this reasoning and go, no, actually, it's fine for me to do nothing, right? I think that most people will go, sure, of course, I should do something. I think actually in practice, where then the next obstacle comes is disagreements about what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what won't be effective. And I think that's something that maybe warrants its whole own discussion on our podcast. And maybe then our next episode should be one discussing what is very topical, especially in the Jewish community, which is BDS. Because I think that's something that we think certainly can be, even if it's not always effective, and fits in terms of this kind of like interconnectedness of how do we leverage the relations that do exist between people in the world, rather than trying to imagine artificial ones. Actually, the world is structured in this way that there's financial decisions we make that all impact each other, and maybe we should think responsibly about them. Whether or not you have a pre-existing close link, boycott strategies are strategies that specifically look at the interconnectedness of the world. And they say, can we hold each other accountable through the existing connected
It relies
relationships?
on a close link.
Yeah,
It depends on that, yeah.
Yeah, and BDS is quite a low barrier of entry to protest. You don't have to like go to the street, join a march, join a picket, really put your like body on the line in an uncomfortable situation. You just have to choose a different object to buy, which is quite an easy, and it does rely on this relational thing of how the world's so interconnected. Over Pesach, which was just a few weeks ago, depending on when this podcast airs, one thing we eat is matzah, and matzah has to be made in very precise ways. So there's a few companies you can buy from. A lot of them are from Israel. And so one thing that a lot of anti-Zionist Jews were doing is trying to find which matzah company can we buy matzah from in order, while also keeping our morals intact and boycotting Israel. And there's a few. And so, you share those out and then you go and buy matzah from them. And it means we can live in alignment with our lives while still not causing excess harm and protesting actions against others, which is a great entryway into politics.
Yeah, and also one of the kind of points that is said often in the Jewish community is this, that BDS is ineffective, this idea that it's ineffective. And I think at least this can cause us to rethink whether we should be driven by our assessment of what could be effective, but rather whether there's some other value to protesting, or at least withholding your support. But yeah, we do need a whole episode on the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Thanks for joining us, Mitchel. That was really interesting, given us a lot to think about. Your source sheet that you've been referring to throughout will be linked below. And yeah, we'll see you all for episode 4.
Thanks for having me.